during the summer vacation after my second year of college, my friends and I decided to go on a trip. There were three of us, myself, Jenna, and Mark, and I were roommates, but Jenna lived with some other people. After some discussion, we settled on Pensacola Beach in Florida. We lived in Atlanta, so that's close to a full day's drive for us, Mark. And I found an Airbnb that seemed perfect. It was a quaint little house in a quiet neighborhood, and the price was within our budget for a 3-night stay. There were only 2 bedrooms, but the living room had a futon, so one of us would have to settle for that. We packed our bags and set off. The drive was long, but we had an all right time. I drove most of the way because we used my car, so when we got there, I was pretty tired. We arrived in the early evening. The sun was low in the sky. Mark had the directions open on his phone, and when we got close to the house, he pointed it out to us. When we pulled up, there was a man standing on the porch. Most hosts just leave the keys in a lockbox, but it seemed that this guy did things the old way. After parking the car, we walked up and introduced ourselves. The owner's name was Jack, and right from the start, something seemed off about him. He was a middle-aged man with a nervous energy. He greeted us with a forced smile and quickly ushered us inside. As he showed us around, he lingered, watching us closely, commenting on small relevant details. Jack insisted on showing us every single thing about the house. For example, he showed us how to adjust the temperature on the refrigerator. He walked us to the basement, showed us how to reset the water heater in case it stopped working, even showed us the circuit box and how to fix it. I had never in my life needed to do any of those things, so what are the chances it would come up in a single weekend? His presence made us all uncomfortable, and he stayed for over an hour. After we got there, I was really hungry, but I was trying to be polite, so I just went with it. Once Jack finally left, we unpacked and went out for some food. When we got back, we just sat around in the living room and talked. Jenna and Mark called dibs on both rooms first, so I was stuck sleeping in the living room. The house was cozy and well furnished. It was small but comfortable enough for a few days. The next day passed without incident. We explored the town, enjoyed some local foods, and then returned to the house in the evening to relax and hang out. None of us was really into partying, so we mostly went out during the day and spent evenings relaxing. Mark got a little too much sun anyway, so he didn't want to do much on the second evening. As we were sitting in the living room talking, the power suddenly went out. It was abrupt, and it startled me. We had the TV on in the background, but we were really just talking and hanging out. We scrambled for our phones to check if it was a blackout out. However, when I looked out the window, I noticed that the street lights were still on, and the other houses in the neighborhood were lit up. Ours was the only place that was in darkness. We assumed it was a blown fuse or circuit. We then laughed, realizing that Jack's tour might have actually come in handy. We walked down to the basement and found the circuit box. As soon as I looked at it, I could tell that none of the switches were tripped. I was the only one paying attention to Jack's lesson, so the other two didn't know. Not knowing what else to do, we went back upstairs. We sat on the couch and talked about it. Key wanted to call Jack, but Jenna didn't want to bother. It was already late, and we didn't want to sit through another one of his lectures. We decided to call him in the morning, and hopefully he would fix it while we were out of the house. We sat around talking for about another half hour, and when it was 11:00 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I went to answer, and to my surprise, it was Jack. He stood there with a smile on his face. "Hey, just driving by, and I saw the power was out." He said, "Thanks, but we're just going to deal with it in the morning." I told him. Jenna, who was standing behind me, whispered, "This is really weird. How would he know the power was out unless he had something to do with it?" Jenna was right. Seemed too strange that he would show up at that exact moment, especially since we hadn't contacted him. He wouldn't have known just by driving by anyway. Just because the lights were out didn't mean the power was cut. I guess if he knew the house had a bad circuit, then maybe he was expecting it. But what was he doing just lingering outside the house, waiting the whole time? It was strange, and we didn't want to let him in. He lingered for a few moments, making some small talk that felt forced and unnecessary. We all wanted him to leave, and after a few uncomfortable minutes, he finally did. After closing the door, we huddled together discussing the situation. We all agreed that it felt like Jack had cut the power to perhaps to create an excuse to come over. We debated what to do, whether to confront him, call the police, or just leave. In the end, we decided that Jack was weird, but probably harmless. We stayed up for another hour and then went to bed. I folded out the futon in the living room, and the other two went to the bedrooms. In the morning when I got up, I walked around the place and went to the kitchen. as when I noticed that the power was back on the clock on the oven was blinking 12 o'clock like it needed to be reset. Jen and Mark got up soon after. We were kind of relieved that we wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. However, when I saw Jen, it seemed like she had seen a ghost. She was holding a piece of paper in her right hand. She passed it to me. It read, "Just came to fix the power jack." Jenna then told me that she found it on the table right next to her bed, and she was sure it was not there the night before. Needless to say, we were all really creeped out, especially Jenna. What on earth would make him think it was okay to do that? Fixing the power was one thing, but going into Jenna's room when she was sleeping was completely unacceptable. I still don't know if he was actually dangerous, maybe just extremely socially unaware, or maybe he was an actual psycho. We couldn't risk it either way. The last night of our trip was spent in a hotel. It wasn't what we planned, but we were just relieved to be out of that house, we reported then. During the summer break following our sophomore year of college, my friends Jen and Mark and I decided to embark on an unforgettable adventure. After much deliberation, we settled on Pensacola Beach in Florida. Living in Atlanta, we had a full day's drive ahead of us. Mark and I, who shared a room, found an ideal Airbnb. It was a charming cottage nestled in a peaceful neighborhood, well within our budget for a 3-night stay. Despite having only 2 bedrooms, the living room housed a futon for one of us to accommodate. With our bags packed, we set off, with me navigating the long drive. Upon our arrival in the early evening, we were greeted by the host, Jack. However, from the moment we stepped onto the porch, something seemed to miss. Jack, a middle-aged man with a distinctly nervous demeanor, ushered us inside with a forced smile. He then proceeded to offer an overly thorough tour of the house, his commentary often irrelevant and his presence unsettling. He insisted on demonstrating the refrigerator's temperature controls, the water heater's reset procedure, and even the intricacies of the circuit breaker. It was clear that Jack's unsolicited knowledge was more a manifestation of his anxiety than any practical necessity. After an hour of Jack's intrusive guidance, we finally unpacked and headed out for dinner. Upon our return, we crashed in the living room, with Jenna and Mark claiming the bedrooms, leaving me to settle on the futon. The cottage was cozy and well-appointed, creating a comfortable atmosphere for our getaway. The next day passed pleasantly as we explored the town and sampled its culinary delights. However, as evening fell, an unexpected event occurred. Abruptly, the power in our rental went out. Initially puzzled, we checked our phones for any news of a blackout, but noticed that the streetlights and neighboring houses were unaffected. Ours was the only dwelling shrouded in darkness. Assuming a blown fuse or tripped circuit, we ventured to the basement in search of the circuit box. To our surprise, none of the switches had been tripped. I, the lone attendee of Jack's lesson on circuit breakers, realized that we were stumped. Unsure of how to remedy the situation, we returned upstairs and consulted with each other. Mark suggested calling Jack, but Jenna hesitated, unwilling to endure another lengthy lecture at such a late hour. We decided to delay calling until morning, hoping that he would resolve the issue while we slept.